Welcome everybody. Welcome to Accessible Design with the learner in mind, the basics of accessibility in Moodle and how to begin advocating for accessibility in your organization. That's a mouthful of a title, I know. We're very glad that you are here. And if you wouldn't mind telling us in the chat a little bit more about you, such as where you're from and how you use Moodle, that would be great. And I see that people are already doing so. We're also going to start off with a little poll to learn more about your Moodle site access within your organization. So please feel free to respond anonymously. That'll pop up here in just a moment. And Jess and I will share a little bit about ourselves in an upcoming slide. And before we get started, as you're filling out the poll here, just so we can see what kind of role you have within your organization, we have a few quick housekeeping elements. First, just letting everybody know that this is an introductory webinar regarding accessibility, but even if you've been doing accessibility work for a long time, we hope that you'll find value in the ideas and suggestions that we have regarding accessibility advocacy toward the end of the webinar. And additionally, we hope you will share your ideas in the chat so that others on the call can learn from your expertise. We have turned on auto captioning. If you are interested in using it, you can find it in the down in the Zoom panel with the CC button. But additionally, we have actually prepared a script with alt text for slide images as well. And we'll go ahead and share that in the chat if you have a need for that. And if you require an alternative format for the script, please do not hesitate to let us know. Looking at the responses here, it looks like we have majority site administrator. We have some site assistant administrators. And then our next biggest group is instructional designers. We have teachers and also a none of the above. So we've got quite a good mix here. Thank you so much for coming. All right, so let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about one another. My name is Carly Cockrell, and I am a learning designer for Moodle US. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I can be physically described as a white woman in her late 30s with shoulder-length wavy hair and glasses. The clients that I work with are primarily in the education, corporate, and government, and also nonprofit sectors. And I would like to be upfront, just right here off the bat, that my teaching style does tend to be more driven through story, including personal disclosure. So there's a level of vulnerability that I will be sharing as we go through this webinar journey. And I just like to rip that Band-Aid off right at the beginning. I am passionate about accessibility in all digital spaces. And the passion that I've developed is from experiencing the benefits of accessible design in my K-12 classrooms and my higher education classrooms. I've been very fortunate to work with a number of users who use accessible technology every day. I'm also passionate about equitable access to high quality online education, because without online learning, I actually wouldn't have the master's degree that I currently have. So prior to joining Moodle US, I actually worked with Jess Bryant, who you'll meet in just a moment, at the Montana Office of Public Instruction as a professional learning coordinator for Montana State educators. And now let's learn about Jess, our amazing chat helper for this webinar.
Hey everyone, my name is Jess Bryant. I'm one of the learning design managers at Moodle US. I can be physically described as a tall white female with long dark brown hair, maybe a few gray hairs. I have experience as in online learning as a high school science teacher to start. And then I worked, like Carly said, at a government agency with her. And now here I am at Moodle US. My passion is really helping people to set up their site and courses to run smoothly while providing that professional and quality experience for the users. As for accessibility, I learned much of what I know now by having to retrofit quite a few live courses. So lots of trial and error, a little bit of time, but I'm really thankful for that whole experience and often reflect on how much I didn't know before. So really my hope for today is that all of you walk away with a couple of new things that you can start implementing right away to make that same difference for your group. So let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Jess. All right, so let's go ahead and frame the conversation here. Why are we talking about accessibility today? If you've been attending our learning design webinar series so far, you may be sensing a pattern about what we're focusing on. The learning design webinar series started with the grade book, or how your students will be assessed. It focused heavily on what your students should know and be able to do. Then we focused on creating Fink's significant learning and the Moodle tools that can help you build learning experiences that drive change within the student, such as acquiring new skills or knowledge or adopting new opinions and beliefs. Now we are starting to look at the how of designing. And because ensuring all students and participants can interact with your content from day one is so important, we would be remiss to not mention it early on in the learning design webinar series. It is important to remember that all students are able to benefit from accessible online course design, regardless of their own personal usage of assistive technology tools. Actually, one such example is video captions. According to a 2015 Oregon State University eCampus Research Unit National Survey with 3Play Media, published by EDUCAUSE, they actually found that 35% of the participants used captions often or always, and 54% of the participants used captions at least some of the time. And I know I'm actually personally in the 35%. So now on to a little bit of personal storytelling, as I think it highlights the why so much better than I can explain. I personally have a physical disability, an invisible disability, if you will. And because of this, I have found a group of accessibility ambassadors and advocates online who are passionate about accessibility for all. And there's a common saying among these groups, and although I've attempted to actually source who said it first, I was unable to determine, full disclosure, but the saying is something like this: the disability group is one of the only minority groups that you can join at any time. Disability impacts many of us, and the older we live, the more likely we are to find ourselves experiencing a disability. One person I follow online, Carice Hill, recently tweeted the following, and I immediately thought of this webinar. Accessibility is not a good deed. Accessibility is not a special need. Accessibility is not disabled greed. Accessibility is a basic human need. Accessibility is the opposite of impede. Accessibility must be guaranteed if disabled people are to succeed. And a big thank you to Carice for the mini poem they shared recently. All right, so it's important to take a moment to explain a bit about accessibility and the acts and legislation in the US. While the law isn't the only reason we should make strides in building accessible content, it is still worthwhile to understand how we got here. And this history is a lot more vast than the timeline that I'll share with you today, but it sets a foundation. So there are a few links that we'll share with you in the chat if you'd like to learn more. First, ada.gov has a nice overview of the history. Second, developing accessible web content from section 508.gov is also a great overview of the revised 508 standards. So if you've been designing online content for a while, you've likely learned about the various acts that I've mentioned here on this timeline. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 really paved the way for future legislation by banning employment discrimination based upon race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It also put an end to segregation in public spaces. Many acts surrounding discrimination actually recognize the Civil Rights Act as a turning point in US history. Then subsequently in 1973, the Rehabilitation Act, which includes section 504 and 508, began and started the prohibition of discrimination on the basis of disability from programs conducted by federal agencies. Excuse me. When people refer to the Rehabilitation Act, they may actually just refer to section 504. And section 508 is also part of this act and was amended in 1998 through the Workforce Investment Act to include the requirement that federal agencies, and often those organizations receiving federal dollars, make sure their technologies and content are accessible. The guidelines often followed are what are called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, was then enacted in 1990 and prohibits discrimination and guarantees people with disabilities have the same opportunities. It was actually modeled after the Civil Rights Act. And just know that there are various titles within the ADA, and there's also physical accessibility acts and legislation that have happened between all of these different things. But those subsequently impact, state, local business, and nonprofit service providers. It is because of these acts, though, that the organization in which you are employed or designing content for may actually fall under these guidelines. All right. So, what is accessibility? Let's take a moment to think of some words that may come to mind when you think of the term accessibility. Go ahead and share in the chat. Just know that there's no right or wrong answer here. We're just curious to see what you think of when you hear the word accessibility. No barriers. Equity, equal access. Everyone benefits. Universal design, open for all. Full access, inclusion. Awesome. No worries for anyone. I like that. Engagement, access. Great. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. So, according to Iwerson and Stahl, accessibility, in the terms that we're speaking about it today, can be defined as an umbrella term for all aspects which influence a person's ability to function within an environment. So let's think about that for a moment. Sometimes it's actually easier to take accessibility into the physical space, as that's where a lot of the accessibility work got its start. So in fact, sometimes the physical space is actually the one that gets the most attention, but we're hopefully making strides and moving it more into the digital space. So let's go ahead and start there for just a brief moment. All right, so taking a look at the two physical spaces that are on screen right now, in a moment, a poll is going to pop up for you to vote anonymously. For anyone joining us who is unable to see the pictures, I'm going to describe the two different pictures. Which of these two spaces do you think is most accessible? Option A is a small width ramp with multiple turns and small wooden barriers on the side of each drop-off. Option B is a large width ramp with 2 turns and large glass and metal railings to the side of the ramp. Go ahead and vote if you haven't already. All right, the votes are coming in. Thanks, everybody. All right. Hopefully none of you are reading ahead with the script, but it looks like the majority of us agree, actually. 92% of us mentioned which one is most accessible is option B. So if you consider what it would be like to navigate each of these ramps, even on foot, you can clearly understand how difficult it would actually be to navigate the narrow ramp with the multiple turns and the very low protective barrier. And digital accessibility continuously improves, just like the physical design of these ramps. Option A may have actually been considered a suitable option 30 years ago, but now option B is more suitable as societies learn more about accessible design. And digital accessibility is actually the same in this regard. It's always improving, changing, and therefore what was designed 20 years ago may not actually meet the accessibility standards of today. All right. So a little bit of history here on Moodle. Moodle is committed to accessibility. It is designed to provide equal functionality and information to all people. This means that there should be no barriers for people regardless of disability, assistive technologies that are used, different sizes and inputs on different input devices. Developers work very hard to ensure accessibility remains top of mind. We'll be exploring more about Moodle's work in accessibility, including the inclusion of the Brick Fields Accessibility Toolkit, beginning in Moodle 3.11, and also the Atto editor, which we'll be focusing on for much of the remainder of the webinar. In addition, we'll understand that teaching about accessible design, we understand that teaching about accessible design simply is the right thing to do, along with teaching about universal design for learning, or UDL, as accessibility and UDL are definitely intertwined. You can actually read more about Moodle's accessibility policy by visiting the link in the chat. And by the way, yes, you guys will be getting a copy of the links that we are sharing in the chat after the conclusion of the webinar too. All right, so you're probably thinking, okay, this all sounds really great. I understand the premise of why, but how do I actually do this? And that's a very reasonable question. One thing that Jess and I have noticed when we worked on accessibility with designers and educators and site admins is there tends to be two different worldviews in accessibility land, as we'll call it. The first worldview may be something like this, and these aren't direct quotes, but things we've maybe kind of heard. I know accessibility is important, but I'm getting my content from many places, so I don't have time. Or I just need to get this course out and I'll come back to it later. Or if someone needs a different format, they'll ask me and then I'll deal with it. And then finally, but not least, the person who actually made the content would be the one that would get in trouble if it isn't accessible, not me. So these statements tend to have more of a reactive mindset toward accessibility. And while it is better to have some commitment to accessibility than no commitment at all, reactive accessibility can actually set people up for difficulty later on. So I have a real life scenario, a real life situation. Sorry, it's not a scenario. The university shall rename nameless, but in a former life, this was a situation that I experienced. So a university, in their shift to digital delivery models, takes a physical copy of a textbook and copies each page using a standard copy machine, not one of those optical character recognition or OCR scanners. Each page of the text is now an image, and this is the only copy of the content available to students. So course after course, the instructors follow the same procedure and create digital content. A few years later, a student who uses text-to-speech technology in Braille enrolls at the university and discovers content in each course is inaccessible. The student then files an official complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, and the Educational Technology Department spends months copying textbook pages using the only OCR scanner on campus to fix the problem for future students. The student ends up withdrawing from the university because the student ends up being so far behind by the time they're able to get the content that they needed in the first place. So in my work as an instructional designer, as I mentioned, I've witnessed this exact scenario. It is painful for everybody involved, regardless of the fact that many online content creators actually do this unintentionally. We fully admit that although the stakes may not be as high all the time as the situation I just described, reactive accessibility does happen. And our intent is not to make people feel ashamed for reactively fixing accessibility issues. Learning about accessibility and taking those lessons forward into the future is actually what matters. In fact, once you have an experience like the one I just described, you're probably going to take the lessons that you've learned and take them forward, and maybe even find yourself acting as sort of an accessibility ambassador within your school or organization. Needless to say, I think it's safe to say that we recommend proactive accessibility, and we will talk more about how to think proactively in accessibility toward the end of the webinar. All right, so let's take a moment reviewing some of the ways you can use Moodle to design accessible content. In this webinar, we're going to take a look at headings, alternative text, hyperlinks, tables, colors, bold and italics, and then captions for video content. We want to be sure that everyone understands that there's more to accessibility than what is mentioned just in this webinar. So therefore, if you do want some additional learning, the Moodle Academy actually has several free asynchronous online courses available on these topics that we would recommend as well. All right. So this portion of the webinar will contain screenshots to show better detail of the Atto editor. And we're going to be focusing on this editor throughout. The Atto editor is a JavaScript editor that was built specifically for Moodle. It can be enabled in your profile preferences by visiting your profile, navigating to editor preferences, and then changing to the Atto text editor. We've included a picture of the Atto editor on the slide, and you'll notice that most of the buttons that you'll see on this editor are the standard what you see is what you get WYSIWYG type of editor. And if you're ever unsure what a button does on the Atto editor, if you simply hover over the button to learn more, it'll let you know. It is also important to note that your site admin may have restricted the type of editor that you can use on your site. So if you're unable to choose this Atto editor, it might be a good idea to inquire with your site administrator about what editors are available to you. So let's go ahead and take a look at some specific features. All right, so I am going to be sourcing some of this information from webaim.org. Web accessibility in mind. It's a great website. I'd recommend it to anybody that's learning more about web accessibility. So first, we're going to talk about headings. As explained in webaim.org, a heading describes the content that follows it, and it's similar to a news headline. When you arrive at a new page, sighted users tend to gravitate toward headings to find what they want on the page. I know I do. Screen readers and other assistive technology users can actually skip from heading to heading, which is very helpful. And Moodle uses headings in many other areas of the site. And so we typically recommend that in most situations, you're going to start with heading large or heading medium when building content. It's important that the headings go in order from largest to smallest. With other editors, what you'll typically see is like H1, H2, H3. And in fact, if you look at the code when you're building content using the Atto editor, you're going to see those same heading tags. And so in Moodle, heading 1 tends to be the course title. Heading 2 is typically the title of books or lessons. Heading 3 or large is the title of an individual page or within a book or a lesson. And then the headings that subsequently follow in the content, the body of the content, may be heading 4 or medium. So therefore, you might find yourself, like I said, using large or medium most frequently. Heading tags in the proper order also help assistive technology users know the hierarchy of the content. A title or main heading is much more overarching of the content than what would be a heading 4 medium, for example. One of the most impactful observations I actually had regarding proper heading usage was when one of my former students who used JAWS demonstrated what navigating the course catalog was like. The course catalog had been designed using a graphic design platform. It looked fantastic. It printed fabulously, but there were no headings in the actual document. So even when the student wanted to simply navigate to a specific category of courses, such as all of the list of English courses, he actually had to listen to the entire 61-page document to hear the list of English courses. So when I'm building content, I think of headings as almost like landmarks that I would want my eyes to gravitate to break up content so that I don't have to read the entire page. Now on to alt text. As explained by webaim.org, alternative text is a textual substitute for non-text content in web pages. Screen readers announce alternative text in place of image, helping users with visual or certain cognitive disabilities perceive the content and function of the images. When you're using the image button in the Atto editor, you'll be provided with an opportunity to add alt text. You are also able to mark if the image is decorative, such as a border below a heading. So much digital content is actually very visually impressive, but without impactful alt text, the meaning of that content becomes lost for a specific population of people. Now, there are many resources available on how to write effective alt text, but I often recommend the Write Good Alt Text to Describe Images website by Harvard University. The website takes you through various images and examples of what would be good alt text. So there's a few things to remember when writing alt text. It should be brief, yet descriptive enough in the context of your content. So tweet size almost. And you'll also see that in the Addo editor, it recommends less than 125 characters, in fact. And you don't need to waste your limited word space by saying picture of or photo of. This is actually duplicative because the screen reader will announce that it's an image. So you know how sometimes when you navigate to a website and the image fails to load and it just says the words on the screen of what the picture is of? That is alt text. So just curious, would anybody be willing to share in the chat what would be good alt text for maybe the image that I included on my slide? Just to see what you guys would think. And it's okay, you don't have to. Display of image properties in Moodle. Okay, very good. Thanks, Brittany. I appreciate you taking, I know it's not anonymous, and so sometimes people are a little shy. Screenshot of alt text field, Moodle dialog box for image properties, screenshot. Yes, very awesome. With an outline around instruction, describe this image. Paula, that is extra context that I think would be very beneficial there. Nice job. All right, thanks everybody. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about hyperlinks. This can be a little bit of a soapbox sometimes with hyperlinks, but hopefully you'll understand why it's so important. So webaim.org explains that hyperlinks or URLs are not always human readable or screen reader friendly. Many URLs actually contain the combinations of numbers, letters, ampersands, dashes, underscores, other characters that make sense to scripts and databases, but they actually make little to no sense to the average person. In most cases, it is better to use human readable text instead of the URL. So you've probably noticed that actually in the chat of the Zoom, when Jess shares a link in the chat, it's actually what we commonly may refer to as an ugly link, for lack of a better term, or an inaccessible link, or non-human readable. It's a link that you would not actually want to read off to anybody on the phone in hopes that they can navigate to the website that you're discussing. It'd be a bad time for everybody involved. So some platforms actually only allow ugly links, but Moodle allows what we'll describe as accessible links that are human readable. So when you type a word and you highlight it, you can create a friendly or human readable link. And you can also do this by clicking on the link button and typing the text to display and then put the URL in there. Now, I want you to imagine that you are listening to digital content and the screen reader gets to an ugly link and reads it out to you. Would you actually know what the website is that you are about to visit? Probably not. That's why accessible links are important. Additionally, screen readers can allow users to navigate to just the list of links and almost kind of like a list format. And so without the context of what the content is that surrounds the link, a list of ugly links essentially becomes useless. So one final point on links. Do you think it is easy to know what link you are about to visit if the friendly link text is click here or read more? I think you probably get the point. Would anyone care to share in chat an example of what you might call a link to one of your courses in maybe an accessible link format? You don't have to actually link to the course though. No click here. So Holly, actually the open in a new window is kind of one of those things that it really depends on in the context of how you are using it. Sometimes what people will consider is, am I taking them outside of the platform? Then oftentimes people will decide to go ahead and open in a new window. Yes, thank you so much, Jess. I appreciate you adding the additional context there. But as you know, you can overuse open in a new tab. Ah, yes. Click to enter BUS 112 Principles of Marketing. Very good. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you participating. Thanks so much. You can learn more and register for the Foundations of New Staff online course here. Nice. All right. Very good. So let's talk tables. Tables can get really fancy. If you've ever made a table in Excel or Google Sheets, you've probably noticed lots of features where you can have color options, merging of cells, complex lookup. In Moodle are specifically meant to be basic, simple tables. And tables created with the Addo editor are genuinely meant to display data. There's not an option to necessarily merge cells, and a caption is also suggested. So if you think about this in Word, if you use Word sometimes, you can run an accessibility check, and tables actually without alt text are typically flagged. So you can think of the caption that you can put with a table in using the Addo editor as a way to describe what the table is of. Now, sometimes we see people use tables for design purposes, and this typically isn't recommended. Screen readers announce tables, and it can be confusing to someone why content may be in a table if it isn't actually data. So when in doubt, we just want you to consider asking yourself, does this need to be a table? In addition, it is best practice to avoid blank cells, and also to ensure that you are defining header rows, for example. Headers can help provide context for the data sets. All right. Now on to colors, bold, and italics. If you are new to the Addo editor, thanks, Vanessa, you may not see color options on the editor bar initially. These are actually added to the editor by the site admin. And the background colors and font colors that do come with the Addo editor are fairly restricted on purpose. They're meant to improve contrast and readability. Although the yellow words on the green background that I have in this example were created using the Addo editor, the colors that come with these buttons without additional plugins, like I said, are pretty limited. And many people actually have needs related to readability of text. This is why we recommend that colors be used carefully and with intention. And this is why we also recommend that bold and italics are deliberate and consistently used across the site. So you can imagine what it would be like if all the text was italicized on a page. I'm sure you can all think of times actually when you were trying to read something, and because of the color or font styling, your ability to read the content well was limited. Now, here's the good thing. You don't have to be a wizard to know about color contrast. We're actually going to show you ways to verify that your contrast is acceptable later on in the webinar. All right. And then finally, let's go ahead and talk about videos. So according to webang.org, accessible multimedia, visual and auditory content that is synchronized must include captions, which is text versions of speech and other important audio content, allowing it to be accessible to people who can't hear all of the audio. Personally, I use captions anytime the captions aren't automatic. If they're automatic, I'm not turning them on. I tend to listen to videos really quietly, and I also find that I understand the content better if I can read it and also listen to it. Many of your course participants are likely in the same boat. Using the video option in the Addo editor allows you to add subtitles and caption tracks. Many people, when they're actually putting video into their courses, they'll initially use YouTube or Vimeo to share their videos, and that's perfectly fine. Whatever platform you use will typically allow you to edit captions, and then you should be able to also download the caption file should you need it. The biggest takeaway from this, though, is that automatic captions are not the most accessible version of a caption file. They are a great starting point, especially if the video was unscripted, but we do recommend that you add it to your list of best practices to go in and edit the captions. Now, in addition, many of you likely know about this, but Moodle supports H5P or HTML5 package. And many people will use the interactive video option of H5P is a way to build in questions and checkpoints throughout the video. We actually love this idea and we do it all the time too. If you've ever added a video to H5P and maybe you've used like the URL for the YouTube link to get it in there, and it just had the automatic caption file, you may have actually noticed that captions did not appear for the end user. In this instance with H5P, they actually need you to interact with the automatic captions and make them better for your end user. Is basically required in that instance. So another way to add video to your course that is a little bit more advanced than using the Addo editor is you can use an embed code for videos that are shared on a streaming platform, and you can use the HTML editor to embed the video on a page. It's a little bit more advanced than what we're covering in this webinar necessarily, but there's quite a bit in Moodle Docs about how to do that. Embedding the video is just another way to ensure that the caption button can be toggled on and off. All right. So now we're going to take a moment before we chat about how to check accessibility to talk a bit about the document space. In this example, we're going to focus very briefly on Microsoft products, but know that the creator of your choice, the document creator of your choice, likely has similar features. If you've been working with Microsoft products for a while, you've probably noticed that there's the ability to add headings, alt text, sometimes it'll even prompt you, accessible hyperlinks and tables. What we've actually discussed in Moodle is transferable to Microsoft products, for example. Now, why are we bringing this up? We know this is a webinar about Moodle. It's because a lot of your content that's added to Moodle may have been created by other people, may have been created using other tools, and the same accessibility practices apply to those other tools. It is common that you'll end up with a document that may be made inaccessibly. And therefore, we want to ensure that these considerations are made not just for the content designed directly in Moodle, but for the content you may add to Moodle. Now, from the screenshots of Microsoft 365 here, you can see similar options to the Moodle Addo editor. Knowing how to use these tools and encouraging the use of accessible design across all areas of your organization can pay dividends in the long run, especially in avoiding that retroactive accessibility fix issue we talked about earlier. Now, if you are interested in learning more about accessibility with other commonly used tools, we are sharing a few links in the chat. As a bonus, some of these products also have accessibility checkers built right in, so we recommend seeing more about those features. And we're excited now to actually show you how to evaluate accessibility in Moodle here in just a few minutes. All right, Jess is a chat extraordinaire. Thank you, Jess. Okay, so now we're going to do a really quick check-in. We're going to have another poll here in just a moment. Now, we have deliberately not shown you how to check accessibility in Moodle yet. And that's because we actually want to teach you to see how we all do as human accessibility checkers first. So take a look at this book page on the left-hand side of the screen now. It was made in Moodle. In a moment, a poll will pop up just to see what your spidey sense is telling you might be an accessibility concern. So I'm going to describe the image briefly here. All the text on the content page is black. There is a smaller heading at the top of the page that says how you will be assessed. Then there's a sentence of text. Then there is a larger heading that says 3-point scale. There is then a bulleted list and a final sentence that says you may now post about yourself in the Getting to Know You forum. And that part is a hyperlink. There are then 2 buttons, one on top and one on bottom, created automatically by the book activity that's a previous to allow the navigation to the next page. All right. Looks like quite a few people are voting. Thank you so much. Give you guys just another couple of seconds here to vote what you think might be a thing that we need to check a little bit closer. All right, so bonus accessibility points. If you are also willing to say in the chat why you'd pay more attention to the element that you voted for. All right. So in this example, it's actually the heading order that is a little bit suspicious here. Okay. So normally headings go in order. They go from larger to smaller. And I know that I only gave you what it looks like on the screen. We didn't look at the code or anything like that. So this was just a spidey sense type of guess. We made the smaller header at the top and actually a larger header at the bottom. So this would add confusion for someone using a screen reader, but it is also confusing to people looking at the page and attempting to skim and scan. Yes, exactly, the hierarchy. Now, some of you mentioned the hyperlink. The hyperlink could definitely have been better. One thing to know actually, and as we have more, webinar series, this may be a topic that we discuss a little bit more. Moodle has a feature where it can do some auto linking for you based upon the other titles of activities that are within your course. So the getting to know you forum, I actually didn't even create that hyperlink. Moodle did it for me because I have a getting to know you forum in this course. So it's a little bit of a tip there where it was using its best guess essentially to help me create a hyperlink there, but good attention to detail with the hyperlinks. All right, so now there's certainly a reason why we spend time talking about the basics of accessibility before actually jumping into the tools that can help you determine if your content is accessible. You know that phrase, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? I think that's how it goes because I always get those wrong. This applies in accessibility land too. If you spend weeks designing a course only to find out that much of the content is inaccessible and you have to go back to fix it, you may find yourself behind a deadline or in a bit of a panic. So we like to, although the checkers exist and we are about to show you how to use them, we want to encourage accessible design with the learner in mind. And that means any learner that you may have on your site at any time. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's available to help us with accessibility in Moodle. All right, so the Atto Toolbar Accessibility Checker. I've actually found that a lot of people that use the Atto editor every day in Moodle never notice that there's a little button that looks like a shape of a person with a circle around it. That's actually an accessibility checker built right into your toolbar. I've personally gotten in the habit of using it each time I save a content page, just in case. And like 99.9% of the time, it doesn't find errors, which is just extra happiness for me. But sometimes it does find things. So in this example, I actually used that green background with the yellow font and it caught the contrast issue. It even recommended what I should do to fix it. That's an easy solution. Now, please keep in mind that this checker may not catch everything. It focuses on things like images with missing and empty alt text, contrast of font and background color, long blocks of text that are missing headings, and tables missing captions, merged cells, and missing row and column headers that are built right into Moodle. Now, do you notice anything else that it will not catch that from what we shared? It actually won't suggest better ways necessarily to use bold and italics, and it isn't going to look for accessible hyperlinks. So knowing these suggestions before you start your journey in accessible design is helpful. Think of it kind of like a spell check. Using the Atto toolbar accessibility checker, say that 5 times fast, starts to become part of your muscle memory after a while. I actually really do like that little tool there. Now, not a Moodle specific tool, but there is a resource I actually learned about from Jess, in fact, called Accessibility Bookmarklets. It's something that you can download and use from within your internet browser to make accessibility features on a web page more visible. And Jess has already shared a link for us. So the image on the slide that I'm showing right now is just using a heading bookmarklet on a Moodle workplace site. The headings bookmarklet is actually really helpful if you need a reminder of which heading to use upon initially authoring a content page. There are other things bookmarklets can actually make visible too, like lists, images, label elements, and appropriate landmark roles. Now, I find that I most frequently use accessibility bookmarklets when I'm actually looking at the Moodle site as a whole and not just the individual content item that I'm creating with the editor. All right. And you may have already heard about this next tool if you've been Moodling for a while. So starting in Moodle 3.11, Moodle actually partnered with Brickfield to include a free accessibility toolkit. This accessibility starter kit is activated by the site administrator, just so you know that, and allows educators and administrators to assess accessibility of their content as a whole. It also provides suggestions on how the accessibility issues should be resolved. Now, you can also get a graphic display like I've shown here on the site with a breakdown of some of the errors and a report with an overview of the errors. Now, we do have 2 links to share with you because this in and of itself was its own webinar. So first, we'll share the Moodle doc about the Brickfield Accessibility Starter Kit. Then if you want to go look into the toolkit in more detail, there's a video there as well. And then finally, there was a lunch and learn with Brickfield in November of 2021. And this lunch and learn goes into the detail that you may be wanting. There is also a paid version of the Brickfield Accessibility Toolkit, and you can learn more about it on the Brickfield website if you're interested. And if you are also a Moodle customer, you may find yourself wondering about some pricing and things like that. You can definitely contact your account manager for more information should you want that. But it can look at some of the accessibility for you without necessarily having to press a button to get a report and things like that. So it's kind of more preventative in the paid version. All right. So we spent a while now talking about the what, why, and how. We'd like to take some time to actually look at the bigger picture. Now, we've touched on proactive accessibility early on in the webinar, but we want to spend a little bit of time just going a little bit deeper. Now, if you've been designing accessible content for a while, and a lot of this was a refresher, the ideas that we share next may help you take your work a step further. All right, so by this point, we've probably set the stage of the painful experiences that reactive accessibility can cause. So let's talk about how to move into the proactive accessibility space. First and foremost, policies within your organization should support accessibility work. You may actually be the first person jumping into this area within your organization, and we admit that can be a bit intimidating. One thing we've heard from many people leading these conversations is the importance of sharing conversations such as the one that we're having with you today with your organization to improve buy-in and explain the why behind accessible design. Once the why is established and buy-in is achieved, work in the policy area of your organization can probably begin. Now, blending these practices in with policy can also help share the load for accessible design into course implementation. Share the load for accessible design because it becomes more of a collective responsibility versus a responsibility of the person that simply interacts with the site most frequently, which probably tends to be the site admin. We then encourage organizations to incorporate accessible design into course implementation workflows. Many organizations already have guidelines to ensure that course designs are effective and aligned with objectives and meeting the needs of all students. Blending accessibility checks in with those guidelines, we have found to be quite effective. Now, if you are just getting started in what we would call like course implementation guidelines or workflows, we do happen to like the OSCR guidelines, or it stands for the SUNY Online Course Quality Review Rubric, OSCR for short. We'll go ahead and share that in the chat. These guidelines are actually available through Creative Commons licensing, and they include accessibility considerations throughout. Now, once you have developed policy and workflows for course implementations, we do recommend that you bring that work to a larger audience. This larger work with a larger audience in your organization does tend to include things like accessibility awareness and training campaigns. One of the most impactful training campaigns that I have helped with did include live demonstration of accessibility needs by a college student who uses JAWS daily. And the impact that he made on the teaching staff, that was enough to bring accessible design to the forefront. And everybody seemed like, oh, this is why. So during this time, you're probably going to find that there are other accessibility buddies within your organization who share your passion, and they may even volunteer or help you with keeping an eye on accessible design practices. During the awareness and training campaigns, it's also important to share how to blend accessible design with the work that is already happening each day. If accessibility is presented as just another checkbox, that can, or something that, you know, people have to do, that mindset can be a bit temporary and can possibly lead to issues later. So we do recommend that the training campaigns kind of happen in bite-sized chunks, as accessible design can be overwhelming for some, and also it can be kind of habitual to design in certain ways and have to retrain yourself to design accessibly. So finally, in this part, celebrating those small wins and can help people realize how far they've come in the process as well. Now, we also recommend that once you start the process of using guidelines in your day-to-day content work, that you consider adding multiple layers of stakeholder reviews for course design. This stakeholder review process may include having someone unfamiliar with your content, but familiar with accessibility, looking over the course design, or it could even include someone who uses assistive technology taking the course for a test drive. This user testing, if possible, can help to also improve guidelines as you see what accessibility concerns are most frequent within your organization. People with multiple accessibility needs are often happy to participate in this process, and it may even be something that's like a paid role within your organization, which would be absolutely great. Now, we also recommend that your organization has an accessibility concerns contact. This person may be listed on multiple web pages within your organization as the person to address concerns related to alternative formats for digital content, or maybe the person to take initial accessibility concerns from the public. By having a person within the organization who is trained to handle the accessibility needs of the general public, you are actually empowering people to self-advocate and get what they want and need from your digital content that your organization provides. And finally, this is a little bit of lingo here, so I apologize ahead of time, but we'll explain a little bit more. So we'd like to recommend that the content selected for courses is chosen with an accessibility mindset. We have found that in the education space in particular, it's common for educators to use content from many different resources. However, third-party content can be problematic if accessibility is thought of in a retroactive mindset. So we do recommend, checking documents from third parties for accessibility, which might include downloading the document and using the document editor's accessibility checker. We also recommend asking vendors who may be selling content to educators for something called a VPAT, or a voluntary product accessibility template. And it's a document that the vendor would have had filled out and tested any accessibility concerns with their product. Now, major publishers do tip accessibility to that next level by only approving purchases that have met their VPAT standards. So you might find somebody in your IT department that is familiar with VPATs, for example. Now, the proactive steps that we just mentioned can truly help to prevent the reactive accessibility flurry that I'm sure many of you have experienced. And we'd love to hear what other suggestions you have. So please feel free to add them in the chat so that your fellow attendees can learn from you as well. All right, so we'd like to leave you with some parting thoughts. As we were preparing for this webinar, we thought of the term accessibility ambassador. Much of what we just mentioned in the previous slide ties into this work, and we'd love to see people leave this webinar feeling empowered to become accessibility ambassadors within your organization. We fully admit that organizational change related to accessibility is a team effort. However, let's consider what you can do as an individual to help this get started. So as we mentioned, you could begin sharing and demonstrating the why behind accessibility to improve buy-in. Let's consider this a little bit more and share some ideas in the chat. What is one thing you could share with your organization related to accessibility? Now, as you're typing some of those responses, the next thing we would say is working on helping to reframe mindsets. When you hear mindsets around accessibility that may be more reactive or dismissive, consider how you may reframe the conversation. If someone says, I just don't have time, perhaps what you could do is help the person identify where to fit accessible design into their day-to-day work. This may be a conversation about accessible design from the beginning, or checking content used by third parties, checking that it's accessible from the start. Now, the next idea relates to that common saying of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I think I got that one right. We've seen organizations create plans to address specific accessibility issues within their organization in an effort to become fully accessible by a specific year. This is an example of starting somewhere and celebrating those starts. This one bite is especially important if you're helping the organization shift from a reactive accessibility mindset to a proactive accessibility mindset. And this may also be a personal bite that you are taking. Maybe you know you want to get started in increasing buy-in, so you choose to speak to 3 people within your organization during a month about accessibility best practices. That's an excellent start. And then finally, celebrate success. Honestly, this is the biggest part of shifting the mindset. Acknowledge when others are making strides in accessibility and help them celebrate those wins. In a past role, I used to send a kudos email when I received a content item that was already accessible and I didn't have to work on and fix. So just a quick, hey, thanks for making sure this is already accessible was enough to recognize. These celebrations can even be bigger, though, if you're taking steps toward a multi-stage retroactive accessibility project and celebrations at key benchmarks when meeting those goals, for example. After all, the goal here is to shift the mindset and help accessible design remain a key part of producing accessible content. And with that, we want to take just a really quick moment. We know it's time to wrap up, but we want to celebrate you. This is genuine. Thank you so much for attending this webinar on the introductory basics of accessibility. Your attendance here tells me and Jess that you guys care about accessible design, and that is something worth celebrating. We know that you guys have added some things into the chat, and so thank you so much for contributing. You will also receive an email with resources mentioned in this webinar, and we would like to request that you participate in a brief survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're interested in attending more of the Learning Design webinar series, please see the Moodle events page for more opportunities. And you guys are now free to leave the webinar as needed. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you so very much.